This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
What's up, jerks?
Manning retired.
Which one?
Both.
I like kickers.
Put him on the board. Hausch Mazzoli. Got it. Championship.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Fantasy Nerds on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network, brought to you by the Fan Up Network. As always, I am Jason Jarvie, coming to you from my beautiful green room here in East Point, Michigan. Another big week in football, and that's where I'm going to start. I want to start with some NFL news that could pertain to everybody fantasy-wise. The first thing I got on my list is the Jets' Eric Decker. He was speaking earlier this week, and he said that he believes that quarterback Ryan Fitzpatrick will sign with the team, but probably not until training camp. So, he had the decent year last year. He had a Fitzmagical season, as I like to say, but can he repeat it? I know the Jets they're trying to figure out if Fitzpatrick is the real deal, if he's the team, if he's the quarterback who can take their team to the next level, or if maybe they have the guy already on their team. Decker said that he's not 100% confident in Geno Smith, but is sure that they still could succeed. And then they have Brett Hundley behind him, and then they also spent a pretty high draft pick on Christian Hackenberg. But my money would also be on Ryan Fitzpatrick coming back to the team because the Jets need to win. And right now they're saying that the parties are around $6 to $8 million apart. A quarterback is the biggest position in the league. That's who gets credit for wins and losses. You don't hear about a safety or defensive tackle who won or lost the game. It's always the quarterback, and they're just going to have to pony up the money, pay him. If not, Ryan Fitzpatrick could go to a team like the Denver Broncos, and I think the Jets would be sorely mistaken if that's what ends up happening. Next on the list, everybody in the Green Bay Packers organization has been taking questions about running back Eddie Lacy's weight, even kicker Mason Crosby. He was recently at a charity event, and from what everyone has been saying, Lacy is actually in the best shape of his life. At the end of the season, Mike McCarthy came out and said that where Lacy is right now, he just can't compete. And if all signs are pointing to him being in some of the best shape of his life, we could see him get back to double-digit touchdowns, I think, and close to 1,500 all-purpose yards. He hadn't gotten to that plateau yet where he was getting 1,500 rushing yards, but I think it's not too crazy to say that he could return to his form of just, you take out last year, and he's been a pretty dependable running back. He's getting around 11 to 1,200 yards, and then he's also been a contributor in the passing game. So if he's coming in great shape, Eddie Lacy could really surprise a lot of people. And I think he's likely going to drop in draft boards because everybody was buying high on him last year, and it did not pan out. So I would keep an eye on Eddie Lacy, how he's going through training camp, and hopefully you can kind of wait to see him in some preseason games, because if he's back to form, he has the ability to be at least a top 10 running back and could even squeak into a top 5 role. Next, Sam Bradford, Philadelphia Eagles quarterback who got a ton of money this season, only to be outshined by the Eagles drafting up to the number 2 spot and drafting quarterback Carson Wentz. He was not happy. He demanded a trade, and he was threatening of holding out. But he has ended it, and he's working out the Eagles. You're getting paid a lot of money just to sit there and whine. And even if he does succeed the top position to Carson Wentz, the dude has made a ton of money. He hasn't been a great quarterback, but even still, he was the number 1 overall, and he's made, according to Sport Track, He's made it $78 million already. At the end of this contract, he'll have made over $100 million in his entire career. That's nothing you should really shake your head at. I know the guy is probably a competitor. He wants to be good, but the Eagles need to do what's best for them. And I think the writing's on the wall. Carson Wentz, it's only a matter of time before he takes over. But for right now, Sam Bradford is going to be the starter of this team. And barring an injury, Carson Wentz is going to be riding the pine. He may not even put on his helmet because they also invested a bunch of money in Chase Daniel as a backup quarterback. It's a really strange situation there. They have $25 million tied up in Wentz. They had $20 million tied up in Bradford and $12 million tied up in essentially what is going to be their third string quarterback. I don't know what the Eagles were really thinking. But hopefully Carson Wentz is the Eagles' Ben Roethlisberger, because if that's the way it works out and he brings a title to Philly, it's all going to be for moot. And then Philadelphia fans will be happy. Sam Bradford will have his money. He'll be happy. So shut up, Sam Bradford. David Carr, the ex-Houston Texan quarterback who was going to be the face of the franchise for them and turned out to be a pretty big dud. He thinks Browns rookie quarterback Cody Kessler could actually win the starting job, and he reminds him of a very, very good quarterback. He says he actually reminds him of Drew Brees, and I don't see that comparison just yet. I see Cody Kessler, he has a lot of question marks with his arm strength, which is going to be a big thing. They drafted Corey Coleman in the first round. You're going to need somebody to throw the ball to that guy. And I don't think the Browns can wait that long for Cody Kessler to develop. Even if Cody Kessler were to come in this season and start, he's going to need at least 3 to 4 years. And more than likely, the Browns aren't going to wait 3 to 4 years for him to get better. And if you look at what Drew Brees did, Brees didn't really pan out until year 4. He had 2 mediocre years. He had a year where he got hurt, and then he came back, started to do good, and he really didn't start putting up gaudy numbers until he went to the Saints. And also going against Kessler is there's just a ton of competition there. They went out and they signed Robert Griffin III. He's likely the number 1 quarterback right now. They still have Josh McCown. Then they also have Austin Davis. There's just too much competition, and Cody Kessler would really have to come out and prove that he is head and shoulders above all the quarterbacks for Hugh Jackson to pretty much risk his first big shot as being a head coach in a rookie quarterback. And I have to talk about this guy. It's not somebody I like because he's a Michigan guy. Tom Brady. And he's currently suspended for the first 4 games of the season, just like last year. But he ended up overturning that suspension. And it looks like right now he still has a chance of getting out of it again. Right now his legal team is petitioning for a rehearing of the case. And if that doesn't work, he actually could ask for a stay of suspension so he can appeal to the Supreme Court. So Deflategate lives, and it's probably never ever going to go away. And I don't know why Roger Goodell just hasn't given up. Tom Brady he's one of the faces of the league. You say NFL, you think Patriots, who have won a bunch of Super Bowls, and Tom Brady is the face of that team. I don't know why they aren't focusing on the game. And this is going to be something you're going to have to monitor throughout. It's going to be in the news, and you're just going to have to watch it out, because last year some people got burned because Tom Brady, we thought he was going to be out the first 4 games, so it really hurt his value. People would even went out and got Jimmy Garoppolo, but he came back in and he had one of his best fantasy seasons in a while. So if Tom Brady, if there's any chance that he does beat the suspension, he plays his full season, he's gonna be a top 3 or 5 quarterback, unless this is the season that he begins to drop off. But I don't see that happening. Now, since I have a ton of time to get you all ready for this upcoming fantasy football season, I'm going to start a new segment. I'm going to go around the league where each week I'll preview a different division and the players that you really should be looking for on those teams. And I'm going to start this week with my hometown conference, NFC North. I'm going to go in the order that they finished last season. So I'll start out with the Minnesota Vikings. They won the division last year, but they mainly won it on Adrian Peterson's shoulders in a defense that gave up the fifth least points in a game. Now, Adrian Peterson, he's going to be Adrian Peterson. He's still going to be a top 5 running back, and I would really argue that he's going to be the best running back this year. Again, I know he's on the other side of 30, but he's more than likely in the first round the safest running back that you can take. Le'Veon Bell, Jamal Charles, David Johnson, all those guys have question marks. And Adrian Peterson, until he drops off, he still deserves to be in the running for the top 3 running backs off the board, if not the first running back off the board. But really for the Minnesota Vikings, Teddy Bridgewater is going to be the key for this team. And he really needs to take the next step for the team in general to really start succeeding. Last year in the playoffs, they really should have advanced, but they kind of got screwed for a kick that went wide. And I know Vikings fans it'll probably haunt them for a while. But Teddy Bridgewater, he needs to take that step. And I know they have some more weapons this year that might help him take that next step. And right now he's ranked around the mid-20s. He's sometimes lower, but it all depends on how if you think that he can develop into being a top 15 to top 10 quarterback. Some of his weapons, Stephon Diggs. Talking about a guy that needs to take a next step. This is a guy that came out last year as a rookie, and he showed flashes, but he really needs to set himself apart and become a top wide receiver threat if this team is going to succeed. Right now, he's the number 1, but he's partially because of Teddy Bridgewater and partially because he just hasn't been in the league long enough. Stephon Diggs is really kind of looked at as either a low wide receiver 2 to wide receiver 3. So he's rated around in the low 30s in wide receivers in general. But the rookie wide receiver that came in to help him, Laquan Treadwell, it's going to help with the double coverages that Diggs saw. He saw a lot of success early in the season last year, and people kind of caught on to what he was doing, and they were able to account for him. He didn't really have Mike Wallace, Charles Johnson, Jairus Wright. Those guys weren't legitimate threats where people had to account for them as well. They could double cover Stephon Diggs. But with Laquan Treadwell coming in, Treadwell himself, he could be the number 1 receiving option in Minnesota, but as a rookie, and he had some question marks coming into the season. The biggest one being that he might be a little slow. But we all know, we've seen guys go through the draft with a low 40 time, and that doesn't really mean anything. If they can go out there and just ball hard, then it's not going to matter. And if Treadwell is good, it's definitely going to help Stephon Diggs. It's also going to help Kyle Rudolph. Rudolph, I think people really wanted him to be better than what he is. And right now, he's a decent backup option who's going to have a solid game here and there. You're just not sure when that game is going to come. And that's going to be the big question mark with him. If you need a backup tight end, you can go for him. But I'm likely not going to spend a draft pick on him. So to recap the Vikings, Adrian Peterson, he deserves to be a first-round pick. Stephon Diggs, right now, he's a wide receiver 3, and look to draft him in the mid to late rounds. And I would go the same with Treadwell. I think he has enough potential to where you could almost draft him as a wide receiver 3 and hope that he'd be a high upside guy. And for Kyle Rudolph, I think you don't draft him until the last round, or I think he really should not be drafted and then just be a waiver pickup guy. And if you want one other guy, if you're just looking to take a flyer, because I'm high on wide receivers this year, Moritz Boringer. He's the gigantic guy from Germany, the gigantic wide receiver from Germany, who I think he's a deep sleeper. I think if Bridgewater can develop, if Treadwell can be a decent receiving option, Boringer could slide in there and provide some wide receiver depth on your team. So if you're looking for a late round flyer, go Moritz Boringer. Next NFC North team, the Green Bay Packers, finished second in the league, and they made the playoffs, and they did it all without some pretty key pieces on the offense. And I know you look at what Aaron Rodgers did, and it was kind of a down year, but even a down year for Aaron Rodgers, he still had 3,800 plus yards. His touchdown to interception was 31-8, and this season he gets his biggest receiving threat back in Jordy Nelson. So I really see Aaron Rodgers having a bounce back season and just shutting everybody up. I'm really, really worried as a Lions fan of what the Packers could do this year. Like I said, Jordy Nelson, he's gonna be a big time threat this year. As long as he can keep his ACL from tearing, Jordy Nelson is gonna get a ton of yards. He's gonna get a ton of targets. You know, James Jones, he's going back on the shelf until somebody else gets hurt. And with Jordy Nelson back, it's going to help all the wide receivers. Randall Cobb, he was thrust into that number one role, and that's really not his role. He's more of a slot guy, and with Jordy Nelson there to be the big threat, Randall Cobb goes back to that guy who can just benefit from not being double covered, and I really see him getting over 1,000 yards this year. Devontae Adams, he might actually be stuck where he is, as he was looked at as the third wide receiver last year. When Nelson went down, a lot of expectations got heaped on him. He suffered from some injuries, and he just never really clicked with Aaron Rodgers, and it didn't help that the tight end Richard Rodgers really kind of came out of his shell last year and became a huge red zone threat. And so Devontae Adams may actually decline this year, and you could see Richard Rodgers still be that touchdown threat once they get into the red zone. So for the Packers, I expect a good year all around, and you're going to see most of these guys go in the top half of the draft. Aaron Rodgers, he's hands down, he's a top 2 quarterback, and you may have to draft him in the first round if you really like the guy, but more than likely second round to third round, depending how your league rolls. If you get a ton of points for touchdowns, Aaron Rodgers is definitely a guy you want to go. The running back Eddie Lacy, who I already talked about, if he is in great shape, he could be a top back. You know, last year they were thinking that he could compete and push to be the number 1 running back last year. So I would look to grab Eddie Lacy, and if you are desperate for running back in the late part of the first round, but really start to look for him in the second round and below. If you were able to get Eddie Lacy in the third round, that's a steal, because he has that ability. And I would also advise, with drafting Eddie Lacy, you're going to want to get James Starks, and you're going to have to probably spend a little bit higher than where he's going to go, because with Eddie Lacy's question marks last year, I don't think you can afford to take a chance on such a high draft pick and him just not panning out. Look for Jordy Nelson in the later part of the second round. If wide receivers are going pretty quick, you could see him in the higher part of the second round. But late second to third rounds is where you're going to see Jordy Nelson go. Randall Cobb, move him down around. Look for him in the third and fourth. And for Richard Rodgers, I look for him in mid to late rounds. And I know some of the fantasy experts are pretty low on him. I'm not really sure why. I really see him as a red zone threat. I know Aaron Rodgers loves himself some Jordy Nelson, but you can't deny what Richard Rodgers did last year. So I look at mid to late rounds, and especially if you let everybody go and get their tight ends, everyone, even if people have started to pick up second tight ends, Richard Rodgers is going to give you some good value. And for Devontae Adams, he's likely going to go higher in drafts on name alone, but I really see him not being drafted until later rounds, just because there's too many mouths to feed in Green Bay, and he's likely going to be the odd man out. Which brings us to the third team in the NFC North, the Detroit Lions. That is my team. It's a tale of two halves. They started out 1-7, went to the break, and finished the season 6-2. Just the entire team. It was a mirror of itself. Matthew Stafford, for the first 8 games, he had 4 single-digit starts, and you can't have that from your quarterback. More than likely, people started dropping him, and I was actually a beneficiary of somebody dropping Matt Stafford in a league where I won a championship. I went out and I picked up Matt Stafford, and he started for me the last half of the season, and he went bananas because in his last 8 games, he had at least 15 points in all of them, and 5 of them, he scored over 20 points. So Matt Stafford really came on. He showed you why he has the ability to be a top 10 quarterback and could even push to be in the top 5. So Matt Stafford, he does lose his biggest threat in Calvin Johnson. And that's going to be, there's a lot of question marks on this offense. There's a lot of potential, but a lot of question marks. I'm going to start at wide receiver. You have Golden Tate. He becomes the main option. And I really see him, he's going to improve from last year. And I think you're going to see somewhere in between last year's production and 2014 production. Last year, he had 800 yards, but he also had CJ. In 2014, when Megatron he missed a couple games, he really took a more prominent role, ended up with 1,300 yards. I see somewhere in the middle is where Golden Tate's going to end up. Matt Stafford is like the gunslingers in the entire league. He's going to spread the ball around. The wide receiver that they went out and got, Marvin Jones, he's going to be the linchpin of this offense. And we don't know the answer to the question, can he help fill the void that Calvin Johnson left? He's got a lot of value. We've seen him get around 800 yards with the Bengals. He does have some injury issues, but at the top end of his value, I really see him topping out around 1,100 yards, touchdown-wise, 8 to 10 touchdowns. But that's at the top end of the value. There's just no standard that you can hold Marvin Jones to. So that's the biggest thing you're going to run into with him. He's going to go somewhere in the middle part of the draft. Eric Ebron, the tight end that has not a lot of people liked him when he was drafted here, and he hasn't done a whole lot to endear himself to the fans. But he's going to have to take that next step this year. He said that it's his time now. Now, Calvin gone, everybody's going to have to step up, and that includes him. And it's going to have to start with him giving Stafford more confidence that he's going to be there and he's going to catch the ball. He's not going to just drop the ball or make some sort of stupid mistake. He has the ability. He looks like one of the top tight ends. You look at what Jimmy Graham and what Rob Gronkowski are going to do. I feel like he has that physical ability. He just hasn't really harnessed it. So you keep an eye on that. Another question mark, running back. No Joik Bell, at least for right now. So you have Theo Riddick and Amir Abdullah. Theo Riddick, he was a PPR monster last year. You look at what Darren Sproles did a couple years ago in New Orleans and what he's continued to do in Philadelphia. Theo Riddick really did that last year. He ended up with 80 receptions. I think he was third on the team in receptions, and that's huge in PPR leagues. In regular leagues, he still has a little bit of value, but it definitely diminishes because you're not getting all those points for him catching swing passes that go for 5 yards. So the running back who's going to get the bulk of the carries right now is Amir Abdullah. And we see him as more of an every down back. And it's kind of hard to pinpoint where you want to draft him. I mean, he had so high expectations last year, and he lost faith of the coaching staff. I think he's going to work into that, and hopefully he can get his fumbles down. But Amir Abdullah, it's going to be an open competition for the running back position. Abdullah will likely be the starter, but you look at the guys behind him. They signed Stephen Ridley, who has his own fumbling problems. And then the dark horse, Zach Zenner, who he actually started a game last year before he went out for the season. So he's going to have to really improve his game if he wants to stay the starting running back. So to round out the Lions, Matthew Stafford, he's right around the bottom of the top 10 quarterbacks. He's usually rated somewhere between 10 and 13. And I would look to draft him in the mid rounds. You let everybody go. They draft Cam Newton, Aaron Rodgers, Andrew Luck. Matt Stafford is going to go in the mid rounds. Unless you see some sort of run on quarterbacks, Stafford is likely slated somewhere in the middle of the draft. Golden Tate and Marvin Jones, right now, I see them as a wide receiver 2 and a wide receiver 3, respectively. I'll start looking to take Golden Tate starting in the later part of the 5th round, and I would start looking to take Marvin Jones starting in the 7th round. Ebron, I wouldn't spend anything more than a late round pick because he hasn't proven that he can be an every game starter for a team. So I would spend a late round pick on him, and he's a decent backup if you have a proven tight end on your team already. Say you drafted a Greg Olsen, you can wait until later rounds, draft Eric Ebron, and if he does pan out, maybe you can play him as a flex. If he really does start producing like a star tight end, you could possibly start a Greg Olsen and an Eric Ebron. But Amir Abdullah and Theo Riddick, they're usually rated in the mid 30s to early 40s in all running backs. And right now, they're really only used as a backup or a flex play at best. Unless, of course, you're in PPR league, where Riddick really shoots up in drafts. And I could see him starting to get drafted in the 5th round. But otherwise, if you're in a regular league, I would look in the middle of the draft to start looking to pick up Amir Abdullah or Theo Riddick. Which brings us to the worst team in the NFC North, the Chicago Bears. They finished dead last in the division, and I don't really see a lot of hope for them. They lost their best offensive weapon in Matt Forte, not to mention that they also lost Martellus Bennett. So there's just a ton of questions there, and I'm not really sure how good they're going to be. Their quarterback, Jay Cutler, he has talent, but he just can't put it together for whatever reason. Every year he hasn't had like a season where like Matthew Stafford has a lot of questions, but he's had gigantic seasons. Jay Cutler has the kind of talent, he can't put it together. Alshon Jeffrey is his only proven target, and after that, he's relying on a lot of stuff. So I actually might consider not drafting Jay Cutler. Their running back situation, as I said, they lost Matt Forte, and they're going to be relying a lot on second-year running back Jeremy Langford. He showed decent promise last year, but taking that big step, being the main guy, it's up in the air. He definitely has the ability. He kind of reminds me of what Matt Forte did, but it was Matt Forte. He did it for so many years. Jeremy Langford is going to have to prove that he can do that. Even still, if he can stay healthy, I really see him as a decent running back 2 option, maybe even a flex play. He's going to be drafted that way regardless. Speaking of the wide receivers, Alshon Jeffrey last year missed 7 games, and he's gonna be a high end wide receiver 2 to a low end wide receiver 1 this year. He's gonna see, he had a ton of targets the year before where he played the entire year, and he's gonna see even more targets now with no Matt Forte and no Martellus Bennett. They're gonna rely a lot on Alshon Jeffrey, and they're gonna have to rely on second year wide receiver Kevin White. As I said, big question marks all around this team. He's another one. He didn't even play last year. He sat out all season with an injury. And if he can become the guy that the Bears thought he could be, when they drafted him, they were hoping he'd stretch the field. And it'll be interesting to see what he can do. And if he does develop into a decent wide receiver, he's going to have some big games, and he could even become a pretty solid wide receiver 2 option. But right now, I would really be cautious about drafting him too high. I would wait and see for the preseason, see what he's like, see if he's fully healthy, and if he's really made his comeback. The other Bear wide receivers, Marquise Wilson and Eddie Royal, it's kind of like the old New Orleans Saints. It's like Devery Henderson and Robert Meacham. They're going to inevitably have a decent game, but you're never going to know when Wilson or Royal are going to really break out. You're going to see Eddie Royal, like in week 2, is going to have a 3-reception game for 120 yards and 2 touchdowns. And he's going to come off of waiver wires, and then he's going to do pretty much nothing for the rest of the season. So there's so many question marks. I'm not even going to talk about Zach Miller, their tight end. So for the Bears, it's pretty sick. I would kind of stay away from them unless they fall and it's really good value. Jay Cutler, he really doesn't deserve to be drafted. I'm not going to draft him. He really should only be looked at in the late round of drafts, in 2 quarterback leagues maybe. But more than likely, I wouldn't be surprised to see him end up on the waiver wire at the start of the season. Jeremy Langford, I would start to look for him towards the end of the 4th, because I think the first couple rounds, it's going to be your high-end running backs. I think you're going to see a lot of wide receivers go. You're going to start to see Rob Gronkowski, Jimmy Graham, and then you start to see quarterbacks go. I think somewhere in the end of the 3rd to the 4th is where I see Jeremy Langford going, just because he is a number 1 running back. There aren't really a lot of options behind him. He has Jaquiz Rodgers and Kadeem Carey behind him, so that team is really going to ride Jeremy Langford into the ground. And with the value of wide receivers, I would start to look for Alshon Jeffrey somewhere in the 3rd round, because he does have a lot of talent. I just don't trust Jay Cutler. And I would look for Kevin White unless he has some sort of breakout, unless people start to say that he's looking like, the next Odell Beckham Jr. I wouldn't look for him until the mid to late rounds, because to start the season, he's going to be a flex option, and he's more than likely just going to be depth on your team. And for Eddie Royal and Marquise Wilson, only if you're looking for depth late in your draft, but more than likely they're going to end up on the waiver wire. That'll do it for Around the League, and I'm going to take a quick break right now. But when I come back, I'm going to have some general fantasy advice for you, and I'm going to debut a new segment called The King's Decree. You're listening to the Fantasy Nerd Show on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. The Fantasy Nerd Show is sponsored by the Fan Up Network. They've developed the ultimate fantasy football app. It's a one-stop shop for everything you need. You can track teams and scores across multiple platforms, get latest injury and player news, and access to expert advice. See the hot trends with waiver pickups and drops. It has everything you need to manage all your fantasy football teams. Android users can get the app in the Play Store, and an iPhone version is coming soon. Go to fanupnetwork.com to learn more, and follow them on Twitter at FanUpNetwork. Welcome back to the Fantasy Nerd Show on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. I'm going to give you some fantasy football advice right now. There's a lot of stuff you can do. Like, we went over some rookies last week and in the weeks before, but really, there isn't a whole lot of player information. I can give you as much information as you could stomach, but really, it's going to be a while until we really see what starts happening in training camp. So there's a lot of stuff you can do, though, to really start getting ready. And one thing that you can do is you want to figure out what kind of league that you want to be a part of. There's a lot of different ways you can go with this. You determine it by how many teams you want to be in the league. More than likely, the standard league is 10 or 12 teams. When 10 or 12, it's pretty even. There's enough players to draft and to pick up on the waiver wire that there's not like a drought of players, but everyone's not also starting just a roster of all-stars. And that's the problem you run into with 8-team leagues, is that even if you're starting 2 quarterbacks and a ton of all the other player positions, everyone just has a stacked roster. And if that's something that you like, so be it. But 10, 12 team leagues are that's what I would suggest. If you get any higher, that's when you start running into difficulties. You really have to start reaching in drafts. If you're an expert in fantasy, I would advise doing it, seeing if it's for you. And a tool you can use, you can go to the ESPN mock drafts. Enter into a 14 or a 16 team draft and just to see how it plays out. You see a lot more players going in the kind of the early mid rounds that don't go until mid to late rounds in the standard 10 team leagues. So decide how big of a league you want to be in, and then decide the scoring system. If you want to have only touchdowns, or if you want to be in the ESPN scoring standard league. You can also, last year, the league that I've been in for as long as I can remember, we tried out doing 2 quarterbacks. It was interesting, but it also kind of took away, we felt it took away from trading the league. We'd been a league where people regularly traded with each other. But because quarterbacks had such a high value with being a 2-quarterback league, and there were so many injuries last year that people weren't giving up the players, even if we were giving really high value. But if decide what kind of roster you want to put out. If you want to start 3 tight ends, it's crazy, but I've heard crazier things. And decide how you want to draft. If you want to do the 2 main ways of drafting, the snake draft, where it goes back and forth, and auction drafts. Both are really fun. I've done multiple drafts in both ways. The snake draft is pretty vanilla, and it is kind of easy. You look at the rankings and where players are likely to go, and it's easy to where players should go. If you see that a guy is ranked 45th overall, you know that he's going to go in the middle of the 5th round. Where it starts to get interesting are auction drafts. They don't go by the standings. You don't have to throw out Adrian Peterson or Le'Veon Bell number 1. One of the fun things about auction drafts is trying to get people to spend more money than they really want to. And in the auction draft that we did, the first guy obviously threw out Adrian Peterson, but then you started seeing guys like somebody threw out Mike Evans in the first round. This was his rookie year. Mike Evans likely didn't go until the 7th round or below in a normal draft, but somebody threw out Mike Evans because they thought if you could get him for $1, it's a steal essentially. So there's a lot more thinking that goes into auction drafts. You kind of have to pinpoint guys that you want to target and know how much money you want to spend for those guys, because once your money's gone, if you say you spend a ton of money on Adrian Peterson, and then you can only spend so much money to fill the rest of your roster. So decide what kind of league you want to be in, and it'll maximize the success that you have in the league, and it's also about having fun. I know people do it for money, and no doubt I do it for money as well. Not a ton of money, but you gotta have fun. If you're not having fun, then what's the point of really doing it? It's about time for me to start wrapping up the show, and I'm going to start ending these podcasts with a new segment that I'd like to call The King's Decree. In The King's Decree, I'm going to give you a bunch of bold predictions, and we can check later in the season, see how right I was, or unfortunately how wrong I was. So my first bold prediction, and it stems from me drafting this guy so high last year, and that's Andrew Luck, quarterback of the Indianapolis Colts. My bold prediction for him, he's going to struggle for the first half of the season. He was hurt all of last year. I think it's going to take him time to get back up to speed. And I really see him in the first half of this season having similar stats through the 8 games that he had last year. And all of last year, he had 1,800 yards, 15 touchdowns, and 12 interceptions. And I think those are pretty pedestrian numbers, you could agree, for Andrew Luck. And I really see him struggling in the first half of the season. But the second half of this prediction, I see him having a red-hot second year. He starts out those 8 games. He has games against Denver, San Diego, Houston, and Kansas City. I wouldn't be surprised if he's 4-4 going, into the second half of the season. And I really see him having a similar type second half like Matt Stafford had last year. I think Andrew Luck, he'll finally be getting up to speed because he's not going to have a ton of time to really get ready through the offseason. And you can never really simulate what a full season is going to be like. But the Colts in that division that they're even at 4-4, they're going to be in the playoff hunt, and the biggest competition is going to be Houston. So I see him just going on a tear. I see him finishing the season. He's going to be a top 5 quarterback, and I see him getting around 4,300 yards and between 30 to 35 touchdowns. And it's going to suck for people who draft him high, because right now I see him in rankings. He's a top 3 quarterback in most rankings that I see. And for somebody who drafts him as either the second or third quarterback off the board, it's just like last year. And I think people at the point, he obviously was injured, but people I think were on the verge of dropping Andrew Luck. And if he struggles in the beginning of the season, people, I don't think they're going to drop him, but they're going to be way more willing to trade away Andrew Luck for less than his value. But for all those people, if they draft well enough, and if they can stick out and ride out Andrew Luck sucking through the first half of the season, they're going to be well rewarded to end the season. And Andrew Luck is a quarterback who could carry a team through a playoff. And fantasy football is all about getting hot players at the right time. If you can get a hot team going on the weeks 10, 11, 12, you can get propelled into the playoffs, and who knows what happens once you get into fantasy football playoffs. And that is the King's Decree. That'll also do it for this episode of the Fantasy Nerds. I'll be back next week. I think I'm going to cover the AFC North next week, so I'll preview them. I'll give you some more advice, and I'll have another bold prediction for you. But as for me, I'm Jason Jarvie. You've been listening to the Fantasy Nerds Show on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network, brought to you by the Fan Up Network. Everybody have a great week.